to talk to you today about research problems, research questions, and hypotheses. And we'll get started on that then. From this lecture and in this chapter in the book, I want you to be able to describe research problems and where they come from and how we come up with research problems. You also need to be able to identify research problems when you see them, understand the difference between research problems and questions, and be able to pick the hypothesis out of a research study. And last of all, we'll couch this all with discussing research topics. So let's get started. Take note in your textbook of the difference between qualitative and quantitative research. We'll be coming back to this again and again in this course because there is a fundamental difference in the methodology and the purposes for each kind. But in general, and at a very superficial level, when we're talking qualitative research, we're talking descriptions and observations and field notes and this rich description with words. Whereas with quantitative research, we're looking at a very specific problem, we're looking at the variables and how we can control them, and we're generally going to want some numbers and to be able to do an analysis. So there's a fundamental difference between those two. Anything of interest or concern to educators can really be researched. Think of a topic such as reading. We have all kinds of issues, concerns, and controversies about reading. We have concerns that many students do not become fluent and proficient readers. There may be an issue with the quality of the teachers. There are many controversies about which methods and materials to use for reading instruction. The research problem then leads to a research design. Let me give you an example. If I have a concern about 8th grade girls' participation in PE, I may wonder what the 8th grade girls' experience is like. How do they respond to dressing out? What do they get to do during PE? How do they respond to the teacher's direction? This would lead to a research design in which I do observations, take field notes, interview 8th grade girls, look at the teacher's lesson plans. I could gather a wonderful, rich description of what the 8th grade girls' PE experience is like. However, if my problem is a concern with the physical fitness of teenage girls, I would design a different study. I would test their fitness and gather data about their levels of physical activity. And with this research problem, I would analyze data to be able to describe the fitness situation of teenage girls. So the research problem that you're trying to focus on does directly lead to how you're going to conduct your study. A good research problem has three aspects. First, it situates itself within a context. The problem, in other words, is couched in a field or a situation. Most of the examples I use in this course come from the world of education. For the focus of this course, we generally want to know about better learning. A good research problem has a purpose. I'm going to gather some data and see what I find is not a purpose. A research problem is just that, a problem we want to find answers for. Finally, a good research problem is significant, not just to the researcher, but to educators, to publishers, to other researchers. Looking at this problem can further understand our understanding of learning or education. Your textbook does a really good job of describing different ways researchers have to establish the significance of their research problems. Well, where do research problems come from? There are really four sources for research problems. Across educational research, there are already developed theories. These are organized groups of principles that guide what we do in education. For example, we know a lot about how students learn by connecting new knowledge to their existing knowledge. Theories about this have been developed, researched, organized, and used. So a research problem can come from an existing theory. And sometimes a researcher may not actually agree with the theory and be looking for a way to contradict it, or they've found something that flies in the face of accepted theory. A lot of research problems derive from personal experience or interest. Research is hard work, and if you're not vested in the problem you're trying to deal with, it can be very tedious. We do our best work when we're interested. What comes to mind is all the research done with autism spectrum disorders. Much of that field of research exists because of those of us with autistic children, acquaintances, or relatives. Sometimes a research problem is developed for a desire to replicate a previous study, and often a researcher is able to put a new twist on the study or try it in a different setting. Finally, a good research problem can emerge from wanting to clarify or to narrow findings. Perhaps a study found that teenage boys engage in risky behaviors more when they are among their peers. But then another study found that peers can be a positive influence. What's the difference here? A researcher may want to clarify this, and which age groups of boys are more likely to do this, or inner city boys, or boys of different socioeconomic status, and so on. Problems are not all researchable. Researchable problems have an inherent possibility that you can gather empirical evidence. Empirical does not mean numbers, but it does mean that something is observable, replicable, or experienced, not just a thought or idea. A true research problem can lead to an exploration of why or a validation for how something is done, but it doesn't just lead to a list of how-tos. So when you get, for example, a curriculum guide, it may be based on research, but that is not research. It's a list of how-tos or what-to-dos. Obviously, value-based concerns are not research problems. For example, asking, is a democracy a good form of government? That's a value-based concern. It's not researchable. Finally, a research problem cannot be vague. We all have concerns about crime, but asking if crime can be prevented is just too vague. It has to be more narrow than that. Graduate students often struggle with coming up with research topics, but actually it's not exclusive to graduate students. Sometimes we all have trouble coming up with research topics. But whenever you decide to research, here are 5 really important questions to ask before you tackle your research. Will you even care in 6 months? I wish I had $1 for every time a graduate student has said, by the time I was done with my dissertation, I didn't ever want to look at it again. How sad. Can it be invested empirically? Ugh. Will it contribute to the field of knowledge or improve something? Does it fit my skill level, my resources I have available, and my time frame? That is a huge one with doc students. Will it pose potential harm for any participants? And that harm doesn't have to be physical. In other words, could it upset people or be psychologically damaging in some way?